Aloha, I'm Paul Norman, and I'm the Executive Director of Neighborhood Place of Puna. Neighborhood Place of Puna is a family-focused nonprofit. We strive to ensure that families have access to the resources, supports, opportunities, and skills they need to thrive, to raise their children in safe, stable, nurturing homes and communities. And today I want to talk a little bit about poverty. We encounter families in poverty in so much of the work we do. Many of the families that we work with would be dramatically helped if the resources were available to lift them up out of poverty. When we look at our own data, 90% of the families we serve meet the qualifications or are eligible for TANF, for temporary assistance to needy families. And additionally, when we look at the most recent ALICE data, we see that statewide, the poverty level, the people living below, the households living below the federal poverty line went from 9% in 2018 to 15% in 2022. And here in Hawai'i County, it's at 18%. And we know from the data that families with children are more likely to be either in poverty or financially unstable, right? There is a category right above poverty. It's called the ALICE threshold. The ALICE family, so ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. And these are individuals who are working but do not have the finances to cover 7 basic household expenses. And those are what you would imagine: housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, a smartphone plan, and taxes. So the majority of individuals who are either in poverty or ALICE are going to be families with young children. And even more, we know that the most economically disadvantaged are single parent households in which a woman is the head of the household. And we also know that there is a correlation between poverty and child maltreatment, or poverty and child abuse and neglect. And this isn't because poor people are necessarily more abusive. It's just because the stress and trauma of poverty and homelessness creates conditions that make child abuse and neglect more likely. And additionally, families with children who are living in poverty are often over-policed, over-monitored, and the authorities are often much quicker to intervene, and often those interventions are much more severe. So there is a very, very, very close relationship between the health and well-being of our families and poverty. And the thing that we need to consider is that poverty creates more poverty, right? We know that children that grow up in poverty, we know that children that experience homelessness as children are more likely to be in poverty as adults. We know that they're more likely to experience homelessness as adults. We also know that they are also more likely not to finish school. They're likely to be more likely to be justice involved, very much more likely to have chronic illness, and they're just generally likely to be less stable. And so as we look around our communities, as we look around, Hawai'i County, which is very concerned at the moment around homelessness and the rise of homelessness, especially the rise of visible homelessness, we really have to ask ourselves, are we planting the seeds for more homelessness by not taking care of our children, by continuing to force our children big portion of our children to grow up in poverty by continuing to force our children to experience homelessness. Because if we look at the homeless numbers, we know that of all the individuals, if you count each individual in every household, we know that about 30% of those individuals are parts of families with children. That means if we were to end family homelessness, if we were to end child homelessness, we would automatically reduce homelessness by 30%. And additionally, we would reduce the conditions to create future homelessness when those children become adults. So the question we really need to ask ourselves is, do we as a community, as a society, want to continue to create a society of scarcity, a society in which children and families and individuals are increasingly experiencing poverty, are increasingly experiencing unstable housing? Because if we do, that's the future we're building, right? We are building a future of more poverty, a future of more homelessness. And then the other option is, do we want to create a society of abundance? I mean, the United States is the richest country in the world. We have the resources, and yet housing is a scarcity. It is a resource that has to be fought over. It is not something that is available abundantly at all income levels, right? I mean, that's part of the problem, is that there's not abundant housing for everybody. So even people who have resources, who have financial wherewithal, are having to fight for housing, right? And as the more expensive housing, or as certain types of housing get further and further out of financial reach, those people with some means are pushed down. They're taking lower quality housing. They're taking the housing that previously might have been for a family that is struggling financially, or for a senior that's struggling financially, or for another individual who's maybe just starting out in their work life and doesn't have a lot of income. So do we want to live in a society in which housing is scarce? Or do we want to live in a society in which housing is abundant? And the same thing is with poverty and with our children. Do we want to continue to perpetuate a community and a society in which more and more children are growing up in poverty, in which more and more children do not have sufficient food to eat, cannot access sufficient and proper and appropriate health care and mental health care, in which families living in rural communities like Puna can't afford transportation to access resources, in which communities like Puna have huge areas of food deserts, in which the life of the majority of households in our community are stressed day in and day out because they cannot make ends meet. I mean, the choice is ours as a community. And what I can share with you is that Neighborhood Place of Puna works to try and create the conditions in which housing can be abundant, in which families have sufficient resources, right? In which they have the skills to access those resources. But also we advocate very strongly to make sure there are more resources in the community, right? There's no reason we cannot transform our community and ensure that every child, every family has a safe and stable place to live. Sure, there are difficulties, there are challenges, but really the change needs to happen here in our hearts collectively. we have to decide what kind of society we want to live in. And I'm pretty sure that all of us want to live in a society in which families and children have access to basic resources, have sufficient food, have health care, have access to all levels of education, and have stable housing. Because in that situation, we create a stronger community, a safer community, a thriving community. Aloha, and have a wonderful week. If you'd like to know more about Neighborhood Place of Puna or make a donation, please visit neighborhoodplaceofpuna.org. If you like this video, please click the like button, please subscribe and follow our channel.